Pete Johnson had always loved the sea. Growing up in the small coastal town of Bayview, he would spend hours sitting on the rocky shore, watching boats of all shapes and sizes cut through the waves. His father had been a fisherman before an accident took his life when Pete was just 12. Though his mother had done her best, money had always been tight, and Pete's dream of owning a boat like his father seemed impossible. Now, at 38, Pete worked as a janitor at Bayview High School. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills for the small apartment he rented near the harbor. Every morning before work, he would walk along the docks, admiring the vessels bobbing in the water, imagining what it would be like to cast off the lines and head out to sea. On a foggy Tuesday morning in April, Pete noticed a small crowd gathering at the far end of the harbor. Curious, he walked over and saw a weathered sign announcing a harbor auction. The harbor master, a burly man named Tom, was listing off boats that would be sold that weekend. "What's going on?" Pete asked an older woman standing nearby. "Harbor's clearing out abandoned vessels," she explained. "Some folks can't afford the dock fees anymore. Others just up and left town. If nobody claims them, they go to auction." Pete nodded, his heart beating a little faster. Maybe, just maybe, this could be his chance. Saturday came and Pete arrived at the auction early, clutching an envelope containing $843, his entire savings. He'd checked his bank account 3 times to make sure he had the exact amount. It wasn't much, but perhaps it would be enough for something small, something he could fix up. The crowd was larger than he expected. Wealthy tourists in designer sunglasses mingled with local fishermen. Pete felt out of place in his faded jeans and worn flannel shirt, but he stood tall and tried to look confident as he examined the boats up for sale. Most were far beyond his budget. A sleek speedboat went for $12,000. A modest sailboat fetched $8,500. With each sale, Pete's hopes dimmed. Then, at the end of the dock, he spotted it, a forgotten fishing boat, maybe 25 feet long, with peeling blue paint and a cabin that had seen better days. The auctioneer, a fast-talking man with a clipboard, approached the vessel with clear distaste. "Next up, lot 17. This fishing boat. Previous owner deceased, no family claimed it. Harbor fees unpaid for 8 months. Starting bid $500. Silence fell over the crowd. People exchanged glances, some snickering, others simply turning away with disinterest. $500. The auctioneer repeated, already looking bored. "Anyone?" Pete raised his hand before he could talk himself out of it. "500, he called. Heads turned. The auctioneer looked surprised, but nodded. "We have $500. Do I hear 600? No one spoke. The crowd had already lost interest, drifting toward more promising lots. Going once, going twice. The auctioneer looked around without much hope. "Sold to the gentleman in the flannel for $500. Pete couldn't believe it. He had just bought a boat, his very own boat. His hands trembled as he counted out the money and signed the paperwork. Tom, the harbor master, approached as the auctioneer moved on. "You sure about this, Pete?" he asked, eyeing the boat with obvious doubt. "That thing's been sitting unused for almost a year. Probably more rot than wood at this point." "I'll fix it up," Pete said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. Tom shook his head. "Dock fees are due at the end of the month. $200. You'll need to pay that or move it somewhere else." Pete nodded, his excitement dimming slightly at this reminder. He'd have to pick up extra shifts at the school to cover the fees, but he'd manage somehow. As the crowd dispersed, Pete climbed aboard his new possession. The deck creaked ominously under his weight, and the boat swayed in a way that suggested it might not be entirely watertight. Inside the small cabin, the air was musty and damp. The previous owner had left behind fishing gear, moldy life jackets, and what looked like decades of accumulated junk. But beneath the grime and decay, Pete could see the boat's potential. The hull seemed mostly solid, and the engine, though rusted, was a good model. With work and time and a lot of elbow grease, maybe he could bring it back to life. His hopeful thoughts were interrupted by laughter. Standing on the dock were 3 men, wealthy weekend boaters by the look of their expensive clothes and tanned skin. "Hey, buddy," called one, a guy with a flashy watch and perfect teeth. "I think you misunderstood. This is a boat auction, not a garbage sale." His friends laughed, and Pete felt his face grow hot. "That thing won't make it past the harbor breakwater," added another. "You'll be swimming home." Pete straightened up. "She'll float just fine once I'm done with her." The men exchanged amused glances. "Good luck with that." said the first, still chuckling as they walked away. Throughout the afternoon, Pete endured more of the same. Word spread quickly in the small town that Pete Johnson, the school janitor, had bought the worst boat in the harbor. People walked by slowly, some openly staring, others trying to hide their smirks. Linda from the coffee shop where Pete stopped every morning before work came by with a cup of black coffee, his usual order. "Thought you might need this," she said, handing him the cup. "Heard you bought yourself a boat." "Thanks," Pete said, grateful for the kindness in her voice where others had shown only mockery. Linda looked at the boat, her expression thoughtful rather than judgmental. "My grandfather used to say any boat can be brought back if someone cares enough to try." Pete smiled. "Your grandfather sounds like a wise man." "He was," Linda agreed. "He also said people are quick to laugh at dreams they're too afraid to chase themselves." As Linda left, Pete sipped his coffee and surveyed his purchase with fresh determination. The boat needed a name, something fitting for its second chance at life. After some thought, he decided on Second Wind. It seemed right. By evening, the harbor had quieted down. Most of the day visitors had left, and even the local fishermen had gone home for dinner. Pete sat on the deck of his boat, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and pink. Despite the day's humiliations, he felt a strange peace. The next morning, Pete arrived at the harbor before dawn, armed with cleaning supplies, work gloves, and a determined spirit. He had 2 hours before his shift at the school started, 2 hours to begin the mammoth task of restoration. He started by simply clearing out the cabin. Bags of trash, old equipment, waterlogged books, and mysterious boxes whose contents had long since rotted away, all were carried off the boat and properly disposed of. By the time he had to leave for work, the cabin was empty but smelled no better. The real work hadn't even begun. At school, the news had already spread. As Pete mopped the hallways, he overheard whispers and snickers from both students and teachers. "That's the guy who bought the rotting boat," one teenager said to another, not bothering to lower his voice as Pete passed by. "I heard it's already half sunk," replied his friend with a laugh. The science teacher, Mr. Reynolds, was more direct. "Johnson," he said, stopping Pete as he worked. "I heard you bought Olson's old fishing boat." Pete nodded, bracing himself for more ridicule. "I knew Olson," Mr. Reynolds continued. "Decent fisherman, terrible at boat maintenance. You've got your work cut out for you." "I know," Pete admitted, "but it's worth trying." Mr. Reynolds studied him for a moment. "Maybe so. Just make sure you check the bilge pump first thing. That old Mariner model was known for issues." Surprised by the practical advice, Pete thanked him. For the next week, Pete fell into a new routine. Early mornings and evenings at the harbor, working tirelessly on the boat. Days at the school, enduring comments that ranged from mockery to occasionally helpful suggestions. Every penny of his paycheck went to boat supplies and parts. The harbor community watched with a mixture of amusement and growing curiosity as the janitor tackled the restoration, with unexpected skill and determination. Some still laughed, convinced he was wasting his time and money. Others, like old Captain Fisher, who had been sailing these waters for 50 years, began offering tips. "That deck won't hold unless you replace those supports," Captain Fisher told him one evening, pointing with his pipe at a particularly rotten section. "I've got some treated lumber in my garage you can have. Too old to use it myself now." Slowly, the boat began to transform. Pete sanded away years of neglect, replaced rotted wood, and cleaned out the engine. The work was backbreaking and progress was slow, but each small improvement felt like a victory. One evening, as the sun was setting, Pete was scrubbing the deck when he noticed something odd about the cabin floor. One section didn't quite match the rest. The boards seemed newer, somehow different from the surrounding wood. Curious, he knelt down for a closer look, running his fingers along the edges. Was it his imagination, or was there a slight gap where there shouldn't be one? Pete knelt on the cabin floor, his fingers tracing the unusual seam. Something definitely wasn't right here. The wood panels in this small section looked slightly newer than the surrounding floor. He pressed down, feeling a slight give. A hidden compartment, maybe? Before he could investigate further, his phone alarm beeped. Time to get home and grab a few hours of sleep before his morning shift at the school. "I'll be back tomorrow," he promised the boat, patting its worn surface affectionately. The next day at Bayview High was harder than usual. News of Pete's boat purchase had fully circulated through the school, and it seemed everyone had an opinion. That was it. No indication of what happened next. Pete carefully folded the map and tucked the journal back into its waterproof pouch. He needed help understanding what he'd found, but he'd have to be careful. The mayor's interest suggested others might want this information too. Pete slept little that night, his mind racing with possibilities. The next morning, exhaustion clouded his thoughts as he mopped the school hallways. He was so distracted that he barely noticed the usual snickers and comments from students passing by. "Earth to Johnson," came a voice, startling him from his thoughts. It was Bill Cooper, the head of maintenance. "You've been mopping the same spot for 5 minutes." "Sorry," Pete mumbled, moving his mop to a dry section of floor. Bill studied him with narrowed eyes. "You look like you haven't slept. That boat giving you trouble?" Pete hesitated. He needed advice, and Bill had always been straight with him. "Can I ask you something?" "In confidence?" Bill glanced around the empty hallway and nodded. "What do you know about Dr. Richard Winters?" Bill's eyebrows shot up. "The Marine guy who went missing, not much. Big news around here when it happened, maybe 15 years back. He was researching something offshore, never came back from a dive." "Why?" Pete chose his words carefully. "I found some of his things on the boat." Bill let out a low whistle. "That was Winters' boat?" No wonder the mayor's sniffing around. "What do you mean?" "Mayor Wilson was involved in the search efforts when Winters disappeared. Very involved. Which seemed odd since they weren't friends or anything. There were rumors." "What kind of rumors?" Pete pressed. Bill shrugged. "Nothing solid. Just talk that Winters had found something valuable, and certain people in town were too interested in his research. After he disappeared, there was a big fight about who got his boat. Eventually, it just sat there when no family claimed it." The bell rang, signaling the start of classes. Bill picked up his toolbox. "Whatever you found, be careful who you tell. Small towns have big ears." Throughout the day, Pete considered his options. He needed someone knowledgeable but trustworthy to look at the journal. By afternoon, he had a plan. After work, he headed not to the harbor but to the local library. Mrs. Davis, the head librarian, had worked there for over 40 years and knew more about local history than anyone in town. More importantly, she had no connection to the harbor politics. "Pete Johnson," she said warmly as he approached her desk. "Haven't seen you since you were in high school. What can I help you with?" "I'm researching local shipwrecks," Pete said, keeping his voice casual. "Particularly one called the Merchant Star. Do you have any information about it?" Mrs. Davis's eyes lit up. "The Merchant Star? Oh my, that's a fascinating piece of history. Lost in the Great Storm of 1856, carrying cargo from Boston to New Orleans. It said the captain took a shortcut too close to our shoreline and paid the price." "Was it carrying anything valuable?" Pete asked. Mrs. Davis lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Legend says it was transporting a collection of artifacts from European museums to a new exhibition in New Orleans. Art, historical items, even gold. But that's mostly speculation since no one ever found the wreck." She peered at him curiously. "Why the sudden interest in maritime history?" Pete hesitated, then made a decision. "Could we talk somewhere private?" In the small reference room, Pete showed Mrs. Davis the journal. Her hands trembled with excitement as she carefully examined the pages. "This is extraordinary," she whispered. "Richard Winters was brilliant. Controversial in some academic circles, but brilliant. He believed the Merchant Star wasn't lost due to the captain's error, but was deliberately steered off course to hide the theft of certain valuable items on board so the shipwreck might contain evidence of historical theft?" Pete asked. "Potentially. But more importantly, it would contain artifacts of significant historical and monetary value." She looked up sharply. "Where did you find this?" "On my boat. It used to belong to Winters, apparently." Mrs. Davis sat back, connecting the dots. "That old fishing boat everyone's talking about? The one the mayor tried to buy yesterday?" News traveled fast in Bayview. "Yes, I think Winters converted it for his research. There might be more hidden compartments and special equipment." "Pete," Mrs. Davis said seriously, "this journal alone is valuable to maritime historians. But if Winters really found the Merchant Star," she shook her head in wonder, "you need to contact the state university. Their marine archaeology department would be the right people to verify this." Pete nodded. "Can you help me reach them? Without alerting the whole town?" "Of course. My niece works in their history department. I can make a call tonight." Pete left the library feeling both excited and nervous. As he walked toward the harbor, he noticed a black SUV parked near his boat. Mayor Wilson was talking to two men in expensive-looking clothes. Something about their presence made Pete hang back, watching from a distance until they finally drove away. When Pete approached his boat, Tom the harbor master intercepted him. "Those friends of yours?" Tom asked, nodding toward the departing vehicle. "Never seen them before," Pete replied. "They were with the mayor." Tom nodded. "Said they were investors interested in harbor development. Been asking questions about ownership records of all the boats." He gave Pete a meaningful look. "Particularly yours." Pete's stomach tightened. "Did they go on board?" "Tried to. I told them harbor rules require owner permission." Tom studied Pete's face. "Whatever game you're playing, Johnson, you've got powerful people interested. That's rarely a good thing for folks like us." "I'm not playing any game," Pete insisted. "Just fixing up a boat nobody wanted." Tom didn't look convinced. "Mayor's got friends on the Harbor Commission. Rules can change when money's involved. Just watch yourself." That night, Pete worked frantically, searching every inch of the boat for additional hidden compartments or equipment. In the small engine room, he discovered panels that didn't match the rest of the interior. Behind one, he found what appeared to be mounting brackets for equipment that had been removed. Behind another, a waterproof case containing diving gear, expensive, specialized equipment that seemed far too advanced for a simple fishing boat. Most surprising was a hidden panel near the helm that revealed a sophisticated sonar system, dormant but seemingly intact. Pete had seen such systems in boating magazines, but never up close. This was professional-grade equipment for underwater mapping and exploration. Pete was connecting the power to test the sonar when he heard footsteps on the dock. He froze, listening. Multiple people were approaching. Quickly, he closed the panel hiding the sonar and moved to the door of the cabin. "Pete, you there?" It was Linda from the coffee shop with a burly, bearded man beside her. Pete relaxed slightly. "Linda, hi. This is my brother Ray, the one who works on boat engines," she explained. "I mentioned your project and he had some free time tonight." Ray nodded in greeting. "Heard you've got an old Mariner engine that needs work." "That would be great," Pete said gratefully. "But I should warn you, this boat's become more complicated than I expected." Linda laughed. "That's what Ray says about every boat he works on." As Ray examined the engine, Pete found himself telling Linda about the mayor's visit and the mysterious investors, though he kept quiet about the journal and map. "The mayor's always got schemes," Linda said. "He's been trying to redevelop the harbor for years. Wants to replace the fishing boats with a yacht club and upscale shops." Ray emerged from the engine compartment, wiping his hands on a rag. "Good news and bad news. Good news is your engine's salvageable. Bad news is you'll need parts that aren't cheap." He glanced around the boat with professional interest. "Strange setup for a fishing vessel. Those mounting brackets in the engine room are for specialized equipment." "What kind of equipment?" Pete asked. "Hard to say without seeing it, but based on the configuration..." Ray paused, thinking. "I'd guess underwater lighting, maybe a small remote operating vehicle. Seen similar setups on research vessels." Later, after Linda and Ray had left with promises to return, Pete sat alone in the cabin, the journal open before him. He now understood what he had stumbled upon. Not just any boat, but a custom-crafted research vessel designed by an expert in marine archaeology. A vessel likely worth far more than anyone in town suspected. Equipped to locate and potentially recover historically significant artifacts. And somewhere offshore, if the journal was correct, lay the remains of the Merchant Star with its valuable cargo. A discovery that could change everything. Pete's phone rang, startling him. It was Mrs. Davis from the library. "Pete, I spoke with my niece," she said, her voice excited. "The Marine Archaeology Department is very interested. They want to send someone to look at the journal and the boat." She paused. "But there's something else you should know. Dr. Winters didn't just disappear. His colleagues believe something happened to prevent him from reporting his find. Something deliberate." A chill ran down Pete's spine as he recalled the mayor's unusual interest and the mysterious investors. "The university people will be here day after tomorrow," Mrs. Davis continued. "Until then, be careful. Not everyone wants history found." As Pete ended the call, a distant flash of lightning illuminated the harbor. Storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, promising rough weather ahead, both literally and figuratively. The storm that had threatened the previous evening hit Bayview with unexpected force. Rain lashed the harbor and wind howled through the rigging of the moored boats. Pete spent a nervous night aboard his vessel, bailing water from small leaks and securing loose items. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a clear sky and a sense of having been cleansed. Pete was exhausted but oddly satisfied. The boat had weathered its first test under his ownership, and though it had taken on some water, it hadn't sunk as many had predicted. He felt a growing connection to the vessel, an understanding of its quirks and strengths. At school, his red-rimmed eyes and soaked clothes drew comments. "Spend the night on that death trap of yours?" Bill asked when they crossed paths in the supply room. Pete nodded wearily. "Had to make sure it didn't sink in the storm." "And did it?" "Still floating," Pete replied with a hint of pride. "Found a few new leaks to patch, but she held together." Bill clapped him on the shoulder. "Good for you. Standing by something when everyone else thinks you're crazy takes guts." Throughout the day, Pete found himself checking the clock, anxious for his shift to end. The university people would be arriving tomorrow, but today he had plans of his own. Ray had promised to return with parts for the engine, and Pete wanted to test the sonar system he'd discovered. When he finally reached the harbor, he was surprised to find the area around his dock unusually busy. A news van from the local station was parked nearby, and a reporter was interviewing Mayor Wilson. "As I've said repeatedly," the mayor was saying to the camera, "our harbor beautification project is essential for attracting tourism. Derelict vessels must be removed for safety and aesthetic reasons." Pete skirted the group and headed for his boat. Tom intercepted him halfway. "Heads up," the harbor master muttered. "Mayor's pushed through an emergency harbor commission meeting for tomorrow morning. Word is they're going to vote on new regulations about unseaworthy vessels that would force you to move your boat within 72 hours. Pete's stomach dropped. "Can they do that?" "Mayor's got 3 of the 5 commission members in his pocket," Tom replied grimly. "I'd say they can do whatever they want. This is about more than harbor beautification, isn't it?" Pete asked. Tom glanced toward the mayor. "Politics in a small town is never simple. Mayor's family has owned half the waterfront property for generations. Whatever makes the harbor valuable makes him richer." He paused. "Word is some developers are interested in building luxury condos where the working docks are now." Pete processed this information as he walked the final steps to his boat. The news wasn't good, but he had until tomorrow. He needed to focus on getting the boat functional enough to impress the university representatives. As he climbed aboard, he noticed someone already in the cabin. His heart raced until he recognized Ray's bulky frame bent over the engine compartment. "Hope you don't mind," Ray called out, wiping grease from his hands. "Linda said you were expecting me and I wanted to get started." "No problem," Pete said, relieved. "Any luck with the engine?" Ray grinned. "She's a stubborn old girl, but I've seen worse. Replaced the fuel lines and cleaned the injectors. Should start up now, though she'll run rough until we get her properly tuned." Pete felt a surge of hope. "Could we test it?" "That's the idea," Ray said. "Got her rigged for a short run. Won't take her far, but enough to prove she's not dead." The prospect of getting the boat actually moving seemed miraculous after all the ridicule Pete had endured. Together, they went through the pre-start checklist Ray had written out. When everything was ready, Pete turned the key. The engine sputtered, coughed, then roared to life. The whole boat vibrated with the long-dormant power now awakened. The sound drew attention from the docks, including the news crew, who turned their cameras toward the suddenly alive vessel. "Keep it running for 10 minutes to circulate fresh fuel through the system," Ray instructed over the noise. Pete couldn't stop grinning. His boat was running. After weeks of mockery and doubt, here was tangible proof that he hadn't been crazy after all. Mayor Wilson appeared dockside, his face a mask of barely contained anger. The news reporter followed, camera operator in tow. "Mr. Johnson," the reporter called out, "is this the boat the mayor claims is derelict and unsafe? It seems to be functioning." Before Pete could answer, Mayor Wilson interjected, "A running engine doesn't make a vessel seaworthy. This boat hasn't been properly inspected or certified." "Actually," Ray spoke up, "I've been doing a full mechanical assessment. I'm certified by the Coast Guard for vessel inspections." He pulled out his wallet and flashed a legitimate-looking ID. "In my professional opinion, while this boat needs work, its hull is sound and its engine is operational. It's no more unsafe than half the fishing fleet." The reporter looked delighted at this unexpected twist. "So would you say the mayor's characterization of this as a derelict vessel is incorrect?" Ray shrugged. "Depends on your definition of derelict. It needs work, sure, but it's been improperly classified in harbor documents. The camera swung to capture the mayor's reaction. His face had turned an alarming shade of red. "The Harbor Commission will make the final determination," he said stiffly before walking away, declining further questions. After the news crew left, Pete turned to Ray in amazement. "Are you really Coast Guard certified?" Ray grinned. "Semi-retired now, but yes. Spent 20 years as a marine safety inspector before opening my repair business. Mayor didn't do his homework." "Thank you," Pete said sincerely. "That might have bought us some time." As evening approached, Pete and Ray continued working on the engine while also testing various systems. To their surprise, much of the specialized equipment was in better condition than expected, having been well protected in the waterproof compartments. Whoever built these modifications knew what they were doing, Ray observed as they examined the sonar system. "This is professional-grade equipment custom installed." With Ray's help, Pete managed to power up the sonar. The display flickered to life, showing a basic image of the harbor bottom beneath them. "Amazing," Pete breathed. "Do you think it could locate something like a shipwreck? With the right coordinates and conditions?" "Absolutely." Ray studied him curiously. "That what this is about? You're looking for something?" Pete hesitated, then decided Ray had earned his trust. He brought out the journal and map, explaining his discoveries and the university's interest. Ray whistled low. "The Merchant Star? That's a legend around here. My grandfather used to talk about it." He examined the map closely. "These coordinates are about 8 miles offshore near Franklin Reef. Tricky area with strong currents, but navigable in good conditions." "Could this boat make it there?" Pete asked. "Not today, but with a few more days of work?" "Possibly." Ray looked thoughtful. "You said university people are coming tomorrow?" Pete nodded. "Marine Archaeology Department." "Good. They'll know how to verify if this is legitimate." Ray checked his watch. "I should head home. Linda's expecting me for dinner, but I'll be back tomorrow morning. Want to have this engine running smoothly when your experts arrive." After Ray left, Pete stayed aboard, reviewing the journal and examining the maps. The coordinates matched a location that, according to Dr. Winter's notes, contained unusual formations that didn't appear natural. The last entries suggested Winters had been planning a final dive to confirm his findings before his disappearance. Pete was so absorbed in his reading that he almost missed the sound of footsteps on the dock. Glancing up, he was startled to see a woman in her 30s approaching the boat. She wore practical clothes and carried a small briefcase. "Pete Johnson?" she called. "I'm Dr. Keller from the State University Marine Archaeology Department. Mrs. Davis said I might find you here." Pete hurried to help her aboard. "I wasn't expecting you until tomorrow. We caught an earlier flight when we saw what Mrs. Davis sent us." She looked around the boat with keen interest. "This really was Richard Winter's vessel?" "As far as I can tell," Pete confirmed. "I found his journal hidden inside, and there's specialized equipment throughout." Dr. Keller's eyes lit up. "Richard was brilliant. Unconventional, but brilliant. He disappeared before I joined the department, but his work is legendary." She ran her hand along the cabin wall. "He believed in keeping his research vessels disguised as ordinary fishing boats to avoid attention." "Well, it worked," Pete said wryly. "Everyone thought this was worthless junk. Until you found it," Dr. Keller pointed out. "May I see the journal?" As Dr. Keller examined the journal, her excitement grew visibly. "This is absolutely authentic," she confirmed. "These notations, these calculations, this is Richard's work without question." She looked up at Pete. "And you say you found a map?" Pete showed her the map with the marked location. Dr. Keller studied it intently. If Richard was right, and he usually was, this could be the most significant historical find on this coastline in decades. She glanced at Pete. The Merchant Star wasn't just carrying art and gold. According to historical records, it was transporting archaeological artifacts from European museums, some dating back to ancient civilizations. Their historical value would be incalculable. "The mayor seems very interested in my boat," Pete said, "and there are investors asking questions." Dr. Keller frowned. "Unfortunately, that's not surprising. There's a lucrative black market for historical artifacts. Richard was always concerned about treasure hunters getting to sites before proper archaeological documentation could be done." She closed the journal carefully. Our department would like to fund a proper expedition to this site, with you and your boat involved, of course. We can draw up an agreement that protects both the historical significance and your rights as the finder. For the first time since buying the boat, Pete felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The university's involvement would legitimize his discovery and provide resources he could never access on his own. There's just one problem, Pete explained. The Harbor Commission is meeting tomorrow to vote on new regulations that could force me to move the boat before it's ready. Dr. Keller smiled confidently. I think we can help with that. The university has considerable influence, especially when it comes to protecting potential historical discoveries. She checked her watch. I should get to my hotel, but I'll be back first thing tomorrow with our legal team. In the meantime, try to keep a low profile. After Dr. Keller left, Pete sat on the deck watching the sunset over the harbor. What had begun as a ridiculed dream had transformed into something far bigger than he could have imagined. His worthless boat might hold the key to a historical treasure, and tomorrow would determine whether he'd get the chance to prove it. The morning of the Harbor Commission meeting dawned bright and clear. Pete had barely slept, his mind racing with all that had happened and what might occur today. He arrived at the small town hall building 30 minutes early, surprised to find a crowd already gathering. Word had spread about his confrontation with the mayor and the mysterious university expert who had visited his boat. Inside the meeting room, Pete spotted Mayor Wilson huddled with two men in expensive suits, the same investors who had been asking questions about his boat. The mayor looked tense, repeatedly checking his watch and glancing toward the door. Tom, the harbor master, nodded to Pete from across the room. Quite a turnout, he observed. Harbor Commission meetings usually draw about 5 people, most of them asleep. Pete scanned the room, recognizing familiar faces. Linda from the coffee shop waved from her seat. Her brother Ray stood near the back wall, arms crossed. Bill Cooper from the school had come, along with Mrs. Davis from the library. Even a few of the fishermen who had mocked him were present, curiosity evident on their weathered faces. At precisely 9 a.m., the meeting was called to order. Mayor Wilson, who chaired the commission, adjusted his tie and addressed the room. Today we're considering new regulations regarding vessel seaworthiness in our harbor, he began smoothly. As many of you know, derelict boats pose safety hazards and damage our town's image. The proposed regulation would require all vessels deemed unseaworthy to be removed within 72 hours or face impoundment. A commission member raised her hand. And who determines what's unseaworthy? A designated harbor inspector, the mayor replied. For now, that would be me. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The mayor pressed on, outlining the regulation with carefully chosen words that couldn't quite hide the targeting of Pete's boat. Just as he called for a vote, the door opened. Dr. Keller entered, followed by 2 colleagues and a man in a tailored suit carrying a briefcase. The crowd parted to let them through. Pardon our interruption, Dr. Keller said pleasantly. I'm Dr. Keller, head of the Marine Archaeology Department at State University. We'd like to address the commission before any vote takes place. The mayor's smile looked strained. This is a closed meeting for official business. Perhaps you could schedule— Actually, interrupted the man with the briefcase. As a public meeting discussing regulations that impact state historical preservation interests, we have standing to speak. He handed the mayor a document. I'm Daniel Wright, University Legal Counsel. The mayor scanned the document, his face darkening. 5 minutes, he conceded. Dr. Keller stepped forward, her voice clear and confident. Thank you, Mayor Wilson. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here regarding the vessel owned by Mr. Pete Johnson, which this regulation appears designed to remove from your harbor. She gestured to her colleagues, who set up a small projector. This boat, far from being derelict, is a custom research vessel designed by the renowned marine archaeologist Dr. Richard Winters, who disappeared 15 years ago while investigating a historically significant shipwreck. Images appeared on the wall, professional photographs of similar research vessels disguised as fishing boats, followed by historical paintings of an old sailing ship. The Merchant Star, lost in 1856, was carrying priceless historical artifacts from European museums to New Orleans, Dr. Keller continued. Its location has been sought for generations. Dr. Winters believed he had found it shortly before his disappearance. The room had gone completely silent. Even the mayor seemed transfixed by the presentation. Mr. Johnson has recovered Dr. Winters' journal and maps from hidden compartments on the boat, Dr. Keller said. The university has verified their authenticity. We're prepared to fund a full expedition, with Mr. Johnson's participation, to document and recover these historically significant artifacts. The university lawyer stepped forward again. Additionally, we filed for emergency historical protection status for both the vessel and the potential wreck site. This federal designation would override any local regulations regarding the boat's status or movement. Mayor Wilson's face had turned an alarming shade of red. This is absurd. That boat is nothing but a hazard. Actually, Ray spoke up from the back, as a certified Coast Guard inspector, I've examined the vessel and found it structurally sound. With minor repairs, it's entirely seaworthy. He held up his certification. I've filed my official report this morning. One of the mayor's investors whispered urgently in his ear. The mayor's expression shifted from anger to calculation. Well, he said, forcing a smile, this changes things. If the boat truly has historical significance, perhaps the town should purchase it for preservation. We'd offer fair market value, of course. Dr. Keller shook her head. The university has already entered an agreement with Mr. Johnson. The boat remains his property, though we're funding its restoration and the expedition. The second investor stepped forward. Perhaps we could outbid the university? My associates and I are collectors with a deep interest in maritime history. The artifacts from the Merchant Star would be public historical treasures, Dr. Keller replied firmly, not private collectibles. Pete, who had been silent until now, finally stood. The room turned to look at him, the school janitor who had been the town's laughingstock just days ago. I bought this boat because something about it called to me, he said simply. Everyone thought I was crazy. Maybe I was. But Dr. Winters built it for a purpose, to discover history that belongs to all of us. I want to finish what he started the right way. The commission voted unanimously to table the proposed regulation. As people filed out afterward, many stopped to speak with Pete, offering congratulations, asking questions, or simply wanting to be associated with what was quickly becoming a local sensation. The following weeks transformed Pete's life. The university provided funds to properly restore the boat, now recognized as Dr. Winters' custom research vessel, the Discovery. Ray oversaw the mechanical work, while Dr. Keller's team helped restore the specialized archaeological equipment. Pete took a leave of absence from his job at the school, with the principal's blessing. The same students who had mocked his floating coffin now crowded the harbor after school, watching in fascination as the vessel was returned to its former glory. As for Mayor Wilson and his investors, an investigation revealed their interest wasn't just in the boat, but in claiming salvage rights to the Merchant Star through a shell company. Their plan had fallen apart with the university's involvement, and the federal protection now extended to the wreck site. 6 weeks after the Harbor Commission meeting, the Discovery set sail on its long-delayed mission. Pete stood at the helm, guided by Ray's expert instruction. Dr. Keller and her team had brought additional equipment, but much of Winters' original technology proved remarkably effective once restored. The journey to the coordinates took just under 3 hours. As they approached the site, the sonar system began showing unusual formations on the seafloor below. That's it, Dr. Keller said excitedly, studying the readouts. Those patterns match what Winters described in his journal. She looked at Pete. You did it. You found the Merchant Star. The university team deployed their underwater drones, sending back real-time video of what lay below. The ghostly outline of a large sailing ship emerged from the murky depths, its wooden hull partially intact after more than 150 years underwater. Scattered around it were crates, some broken open to reveal glimpses of their precious contents, marble sculptures, metal artifacts, and items yet to be identified. This is just the beginning, Dr. Keller told Pete as they watched the footage. A proper archaeological excavation will take months, maybe years. But you've made it possible. Back in Bayview, the story made headlines far beyond the local paper. Local man's mocked purchase leads to historic discovery, read the front page of the state newspaper. Television crews interviewed Pete, who found himself suddenly uncomfortable with the attention. I just bought a boat, he would say with a shrug. Dr. Winters did the real work. I was just lucky enough to find his research. The university offered Pete a position as part of the ongoing expedition team, recognizing his growing knowledge of the vessel and his natural aptitude for the work. For the first time in his life, he found himself doing something that felt meaningful, helping recover history that might otherwise have been lost. One evening, as the sunset painted the harbor in gold and pink, Pete sat on the deck of the now beautiful Discovery, sipping coffee that Linda had brought him. "Remember when everyone thought you were crazy?" she asked, settling beside him. Pete smiled. "Sometimes the best things in life look worthless to others until you show them what's inside." In the months that followed, the Merchant Star excavation yielded treasures beyond what anyone had imagined, not just in gold and artifacts, but in historical knowledge. Museums created special exhibits featuring the finds, always crediting Dr. Winters' research and Pete's discovery. The boat that had once been the town joke became a point of pride for Bayview, with tours offered when it wasn't at the excavation site. Children who had once drawn mocking pictures now dreamed of becoming marine archaeologists. And Pete, who had spent his life feeling invisible, found himself exactly where he belonged, standing at the helm of the Discovery, continuing the journey that had begun with one impulsive purchase and the courage to believe in something nobody else could see.